What if a show about a butler quietly made television history every few seasons without anyone fully noticing? A future comedy legend got fired without even a phone call. An Emmy was won with a joke that took a shot at Bill Cosby. A final episode ended on a freeze frame that never got resolved. And two cast members eventually ended up on starships in completely different corners of the galaxy. Benson looked like a simple political sitcom about a man working his way up from the mansion to the governor's office. But the real story was far stranger and more interesting than the one on screen. Here are 15 weird facts about Benson, 1979, you didn't know. Fact 15. Jerry Seinfeld was fired without a phone call. Long before Jerry Seinfeld became one of the most successful comedians in television history, he was a struggling stand-up trying to land his first real acting role. In 1980, he got what seemed like a genuine break. He was cast in a recurring part on Benson, playing a character named Frankie, a mail carrier at the governor's mansion who was also an aspiring comedian. The character would show up with his mailbag and immediately try to pitch terrible jokes to whoever was nearby, with Benson regularly telling him to get out. It was a small role, but it was a foot in the door. Frankie appeared in 3 episodes during the show's second season, including an episode called Fool's Gold that marked Seinfeld's first ever credited acting appearance on television. For a young comic still figuring out how to turn stand-up success into an acting career, those 3 episodes represented real momentum. Among the weird facts about Benson 1979, this one starts in the most ordinary way possible, a young man getting a chance before it turns into something genuinely painful. The producers decided they did not want to continue with the character, and they made that decision without bothering to inform Seinfeld directly. He was not called. He was not sent a note. He simply showed up to the next table read, expecting to perform his scenes, looked around the room, and realized that everyone else had a script, and he did not. That was how he found out he had been let go from the show. Years later, after Seinfeld had become one of the defining comedic voices of his generation, he talked about that experience openly and credited it as one of the motivating forces behind his decision to eventually create his own show where he would have full creative control. The humiliation of standing in that room without a script turned into part of the fuel that built an empire. Benson let Jerry Seinfeld go without a word. He spent the next decade making sure that would never happen to him again. Before moving ahead, take a quick second to subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for the next story. Fact 14. Robert Guillaume preferred playing Benson on soap. When Robert Guillaume was given his own spin-off series in 1979, most people assumed he was thrilled. He was finally the lead. The show carried his character's name in the title. It ran for 7 seasons and earned him an Emmy. By any conventional measure, Benson was the bigger success story. But Guillaume himself said something that surprised people whenever the subject came up in interviews. He preferred playing Benson on soap. The reason came down to what the character was actually allowed to be. On soap, Benson was grouchier, more sarcastic, sharper at the edges, and had what Guillaume described as an off-color sense of humor that made the character feel genuinely 3-dimensional. He picked fights, he pushed back hard, and he had real bite. Those qualities were central to why the character worked and why audiences responded so strongly to him in the first place. Among the weird facts about Benson 1979, this one gets at something true about how spin-offs often compromise the very qualities that made a character worth spinning off in the first place. When producer Susan Harris moved Benson into his own show as the central figure, she made a deliberate decision to soften him. He needed to be more affable, more broadly appealing. Easier to root for week after week as the hero, the network wanted a character that mass audiences would accept without friction. The sharpness that Guillaume loved was smoothed down to make room for that. Guillaume understood the business reasoning and never made his preference into a grievance. He played the version of Benson that the show required and played it well enough to win 2 Emmys. But whenever someone asked him directly which version of the character he enjoyed more, his answer was always the same. The meaner, funnier, harder-edged man who worked for the Tate family on soap was the one he genuinely loved performing. The version that had his name on the marquee was a compromise, and he knew it. Fact 13. Benson played Trivial Pursuit against death. If you only knew Benson as a political sitcom about a sharp-tongued butler navigating government bureaucracy, you were missing one of its stranger detours. The show occasionally took creative swings that had nothing to do with budget committees or election campaigns, and one of those swings produced what is almost certainly the most surreal half-hour in its entire 7-season run. Benson sat down and played Trivial Pursuit against the Grim Reaper, with the lives of a busload of children hanging on the result. The episode presented death as a character who went by the name G. Reaper, which the show played entirely straight, while still being aware of how absurd the premise was. A dangerous storm had trapped a group of school children, and the only path to saving them ran through a board game with a supernatural entity who had no obvious reason to agree to such terms, but apparently had the time. Among the weird facts about Benson 1979, this one is the hardest to explain without sounding like you are making it up. The tension in the game escalated when Benson noticed that every question Death received was somehow related to Death itself, giving him an obvious and unfair advantage. Benson called this out repeatedly and loudly, which is exactly the kind of scene that works because of how committed Guillaume was to playing it with complete seriousness, regardless of how ridiculous the situation had become. Death lost the game. He missed a question about the Charles Bronson film Death Wish, which is a detail so perfectly chosen that it almost feels like the writers earned a bonus for it. The personification of death, unable to answer a question about a movie titled Death Wish, lost a board game to a sitcom character and had to let the children go free. The writers of Benson were clearly not operating under any obligation to stay within realistic storytelling boundaries, and episodes like this one made that very clear. Fact 12. 2 future Star Trek legends were cast members. Before either of them ever set foot on a starship or a space station, 2 men who would go on to define separate corners of the Star Trek universe spent years working together in a governor's mansion on a network sitcom. Ethan Phillips and Renee Auberjonois were both cast members on Benson, and their paths crossed years before either of them knew what was coming next in their careers. Phillips joined in 1980 as Pete Downey, the governor's frequently flustered press secretary, who eventually married Denise Stevens and became a father before leaving the show in Season 5. Auberjonois came aboard in Season 2 as Clayton Runnymede Endicott III, the pompous and hypochondriac chief of staff who became one of the show's most important characters and eventually earned Auberjonois an Emmy nomination for his performance in 1984. The 2 actors developed a genuine working relationship across multiple seasons and the kind of comedic chemistry that made their scenes together consistently reliable. Among the weird facts about Benson 1979, this one lands differently when you know the full timeline. After the show ended in 1986, both actors continued building their careers in film and television. Phillips eventually landed the role of Neelix, the enthusiastic Talaxian chef and morale officer on Star Trek Voyager, appearing in 168 episodes between 1995 and 2001. Auberjonois became the shape-shifting Constable Odo on Star Trek Deep Space Nine, the stern and quietly complex security chief who anchored that series for all 7 of its seasons from 1993 through 1999. The 2 men who had played a bumbling press secretary and an insufferable political advisor in a network sitcom eventually became beloved fixtures in one of science fiction's most enduring franchises. They started going to Star Trek conventions where fans would occasionally ask them about Benson, which meant the governor's mansion followed them all the way to the Delta Quadrant. That is not a sentence anyone would have predicted when the show premiered in 1979. Fact 11. Guillaume made Emmy history with one joke. When Robert Guillaume won the Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Comedy Series in 1985, he became the first African American to win in that specific category. It was a landmark moment in television history, one that had been a long time coming and that Guillaume was fully aware of when he walked up to collect the award. The achievement deserved a speech with some weight behind it. Guillaume gave it weight, and then he punctured the whole thing with a single line that got the room laughing. He thanked Bill Cosby for not being there. Cosby had removed himself from Emmy consideration that year while starring in The Cosby Show, which was dominating American television and pulling numbers that would have made him the obvious frontrunner in any category he entered. Without Cosby in the running, Guillaume's path to the trophy was clearer than it might otherwise have been, and he acknowledged this reality directly rather than pretending it away. The joke was self-aware, honest, and perfectly timed. Among the weird facts about Benson 1979, this one reveals something about Guillaume as a performer that the show itself sometimes undersold. He was sharp, quick, and completely comfortable puncturing the solemnity of a serious moment with a well-placed laugh. The Emmys expected a conventional acceptance speech. Guillaume gave them one and then did something unexpected with it. What the joke did not diminish was the actual significance of the win. Guillaume had previously won the Outstanding Supporting Actor Emmy in 1979 for playing Benson on Soap, which made him the first black actor to win in both the supporting and lead comedy categories. That double achievement stood for decades. He earned 6 Emmy nominations for playing the same character across 2 different shows, and his 1985 win remains a genuine historical marker in the story of who gets recognized in American television. Fact 10. Real sisters played cousins on the show. In a 1985 episode called Katie's Cousin, the show brought in a guest character who was supposed to be a visiting relative of Governor Gatling's daughter, Katie. The actress who played the cousin was Tracy Gold, who at the time was already well known to television audiences as Carol Seaver on Growing Pains. What the episode did not announce, nights because it did not need to, was that Tracy Gold and Missy Gold, who played Katie, were actual sisters in real life. The episode's plot gave the two of them plenty to work with. Tracy's character talked Katie into lying to her father about where they were spending the evening, and the two girls were eventually caught together at a bar, leading to the kind of parental confrontation and life lesson that the show handled comfortably in its later seasons. The performances had a natural ease to them that made sense once you knew who was actually sharing the screen. Among the weird facts about Benson, 1979, this one comes with an Easter egg that most viewers would have passed right by. The bar where the girls were caught was named Brandy's, and that name was not randomly chosen by the writing staff. Brandy was the name of Missy and Tracy's younger sister, Brandy Gold, who was working at the time as a recurring character on the medical drama Saint Elsewhere. The episode quietly paid tribute to all 3 Gold sisters without ever drawing attention to what it was doing. The Gold family was a genuine television dynasty during the 1980s, with multiple sisters working across multiple popular shows simultaneously. Missy on Benson, Tracy on Growing Pains, and Brandy on Saint Elsewhere represented an unusual concentration of one family's presence across the television landscape of that decade. Tracy's guest appearance on her younger sister's show added a real warmth to an episode that was already about family, even if the audience at home had no idea just how literal that theme had become. Fact 9. Caroline McWilliams, was married to Michael Keaton. Caroline McWilliams played Marcy Hill, the sensible and often romantically unlucky secretary, across several seasons of the show. Off-camera, her life during that same period was considerably more dramatic than anything Marcy ever experienced in the governor's mansion. McWilliams was married to Michael Keaton from 1982 through 1990, which covered the majority of her time on Benson and extended well past the show's finale. The couple met while both were working their way through the middle levels of Hollywood, sharing the particular experience of actors who have enough work to stay optimistic, but not yet enough success to feel settled. They married in 1982 and had a son named Sean the following year. McWilliams was filming Benson while managing a new marriage and a new baby, which meant her years on the show were among the most personally eventful of her life. Among the weird facts about Benson 1979, this one keeps expanding the further you follow it. Keaton's career would eventually produce Batman and a string of defining roles, but during the Benson years, he was still building toward that. McWilliams and Keaton divorced in 1990, reportedly remaining on friendly terms through the years that followed. Their son, Sean, took a completely different creative direction from either parent and became a songwriter and music producer, co-writing Thomas Rhett's massive country hit, Die a Happy Man, and winning a Grammy for his contributions to Lizzo's album, 'Cause I Love You. McWilliams passed away in 2010 from complications related to multiple myeloma. At the 2015 Golden Globes, Keaton delivered an acceptance speech that became one of the most emotionally resonant moments of the evening, praising Sean directly and crediting McWilliams for raising him. The woman who played a secretary on a 1980s political sitcom left a legacy that reached from an Emmy-nominated network comedy all the way to a Grammy stage and a Golden Globe podium, through the son she raised while working on a show most people have half forgotten. Fact 8. Denise was written out by sending her to NASA. When Dee Hody's character, Denise Stevens Downey, and her husband Pete left the show during season 6, the writers needed an exit explanation and landed on one of the most improbable career changes in sitcom history. According to the storyline, Denise had been offered a position at NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. She needed to relocate for the job, and so the couple was gone. For a character who had been portrayed throughout her time on the show as cheerful, warm, and genuinely not very technically minded, this destination was difficult to explain. There was no build-up, no storyline in which Denise developed a sudden passion for aerospace, no scene where she revealed a hidden background in engineering or physics. She had been a secretary who fell in love with the press secretary, and the two of them got married and had a child. NASA was not on any reasonable projection of where her story was heading. Among the weird facts about Benson 1979, this one suggests the writers simply liked the sound of NASA and decided the details could work themselves out off-screen. The exit was mentioned, accepted by the other characters without apparent confusion, and the show moved forward. No one in the governor's mansion stopped to ask the obvious question about how the governor's former secretary had qualified for America's most prestigious scientific organization. Both Dee Hottie and Ethan Phillips made guest appearances in Season 6 to close out their storyline before departing completely. The NASA explanation was delivered and left alone. It remains one of the odder character exits in the show's run, a brief line that was supposed to explain everything and instead raised questions nobody involved appeared especially interested in answering. Fact 7. The Chief of Staff character vanished and returned as someone else. If you watched the pilot episode of Benson and then came back for Season 2, you would have noticed something strange happening in the governor's office. The Chief of Staff was a character named John Taylor in the pilot, played by David Huddleston. When the show was picked up for a full first season, the role was recast with Louis J. Stadlin taking over the same character for the remaining episodes. Two different actors, one name, and then something far stranger. When Season 2 began in 1980, John Taylor was simply gone. He did not leave, he did not retire, he did not transfer to another department, he was not mentioned again. In his place was an entirely new character named Clayton Runnymede Endicott III, played by René Auberjonois, who appeared as if he had always been part of the governor's staff and had simply never come up in conversation before. Among the weird facts about Benson 1979, this one has a name in television fandom, Chuck Cunningham Syndrome, borrowed from a Happy Days character who disappeared from the show under identical circumstances and was never acknowledged again. What makes the Benson version particularly striking is the scale of what replaced the missing character. Clayton Endicott did not feel like a patch over a gap. He became one of the most important and beloved figures in the entire show. Auberjonois earned an Emmy nomination for the role. Clayton's pompous personality, his hypochondria, his contentious but ultimately genuine respect for Benson became central to the show's dynamic for 6 seasons. It is almost impossible to imagine the show without him. And yet he was only there because a different character, with a different name and a different actor, had simply ceased to exist between seasons, with no explanation offered and none expected. Fact 6. Frenchie from Grease joined the cast. When Dee Hoty joined Benson in 1981 as Denise Stevens, audiences recognized her immediately, and with good reason. 3 years earlier, she had played Frenchie in Grease, the blockbuster musical film that had become one of the defining pop culture events of the late 1970s. Frenchie was the beauty school dropout with the pink hair and the warm heart, and she had made a strong enough impression that Dee Hoty's face was one viewers associated with something much bigger than a supporting role in a sitcom. The producers clearly understood what they were getting when they cast her. Her natural warmth and comedic timing fit well with the ensemble, and Denise Stevens became a genuinely likable addition to the governor's mansion as the optimistic counterpart to the more cynical personalities already established on the show. Among the weird facts about Benson, 1979, this casting connection is one of the more enjoyable ones because it brings two very different television and film worlds into the same hallway. Denise eventually married Pete Downey, had a child with him, and left the show in Season 5 with guest appearances into Season 6 before the NASA exit closed her storyline. After Benson, Hoty went on to find a different kind of lasting fame as Stacey Jones on Shining Time Station, the beloved children's series that ran from 1989 through 1995 and introduced a generation of young viewers to Thomas the Tank Engine. What sets Dee Hoty apart within Grease history specifically is a distinction almost no one else in that franchise can claim. She is the only actress to appear in all 3 major screen versions of the property: the original 1978 film, the 1982 sequel Grease 2, and the 2016 television production Grease Live, in which she played the diner waitress Vi. The role of Vi had been played in the original film by the legendary Joan Blondell, which makes Dee Hoty's appearance in the remake a quiet full-circle moment connecting all 3 generations of the franchise. Fact 5. Missy Gold became a psychologist. Missy Gold played Katie Gatling, the governor's young daughter, for the entire 7-season run of the show. She joined the cast when she was 6 years old and was 9 by the time filming wrapped in 1986. For a child actress who had been in front of cameras for the majority of her conscious life, the obvious assumption was that she would continue in entertainment. She did not. She walked away from acting entirely and never came back. Gold had started performing even before Benson, with an early credit in the miniseries Captains and the Kings in 1976. But in interviews years later, she was clear that acting had never been a deep personal passion. She described herself as more of a student than a performer, someone who felt drawn toward learning in a way that the entertainment industry simply could not satisfy. Her older sister Tracy, who built a sustained career on Growing Pains, was a natural fit for the profession. Missy was not, and she knew it early enough to act on that knowledge. Among the weird facts about Benson 1979, this one carries the most genuine surprise because of how completely she pivoted. After the show ended, Gold was offered a test for a soap opera role and turned it down without hesitation. She enrolled at Georgetown University, finished her degree, and then continued her education at the California School of Professional Psychology, where she completed a PhD in clinical psychology. She became Dr. Melissa Gold. Gold now maintains a private practice in California, working as a licensed psychologist. In a 2022 interview, she said that her years as a child actress actually inform her work as a therapist, giving her specific insight into the pressures of public expectation and the complexity of identity formation under unusual circumstances. Katie Gatling grew up on screen and then stepped off it entirely, becoming one of the more quietly remarkable stories in the history of a show that had no shortage of them. Fact 4. Ingrid Swenson's running gag became the show's most reliable laugh for 7 seasons. One joke in Benson was more dependable than almost anything else the writers produced. It involved Gretchen Krauss, the governor's German chef played by Ingrid Swenson, and it worked the same way every single time it appeared. Benson and Gretchen would argue, as they did constantly throughout the entire run of the show. Gretchen would storm out of the room. Benson would wait until she was safely through the door and then deliver one final cutting remark under his breath, convinced he had gotten the last word. Then, from somewhere off-screen, Swenson would shout in her thick German accent that she could hear him. The words were always drawn out for maximum effect. The delivery was always perfectly timed to land just when the audience had settled into believing Benson had won. And it always worked, season after season, episode after episode, without losing any of its reliability. Among the weird facts about Benson 1979, this one is the most structurally interesting because it raises a question about why a repeated joke that everyone can see coming keeps working. Part of the answer is in the relationship underneath the gag. Benson keeps making the final remark even though he knows by now that she can always hear him. Gretchen keeps responding even though she knows the remark is coming. The joke is not really about surprise. It is about two people who understand each other completely and have found a ritual in their antagonism. Swenson's timing was the other ingredient. The elongated way she stretched the words turned the punchline into a performance in itself. Audiences started laughing before she finished speaking because the delivery was its own event. For a show that covered 7 seasons and needed to stay interesting across a long run, that running gag was among the most reliable structural anchors the writers had, and Swenson never let it get stale. Fact 3. The final episode ended on a freeze frame that never got resolved. By the time Benson reached its 7th season, the character had traveled a remarkable distance from where he started. He had come into the governor's mansion as head of household affairs and worked his way up through budget director and then lieutenant governor. The final arc of the show placed him in a race for the governorship against his former employer, Governor Gatling, the man he had served and observed and quietly outlasted for years. The finale built toward the election results with the kind of tension the show had been building toward for multiple seasons. Benson and Gatling sat together, watching the returns come in on television, the campaign over, the friendship intact despite the competition. A news broadcaster began to announce the projected winner. The screen froze. The credits rolled. The audience never found out who won. Among the weird facts about Benson 1979, this ending is the one that still generates the most frustration from people who watched the show during its original run. The freeze frame was not an artistic choice or a deliberate ambiguity the writers wanted to leave in place. It was the result of a practical decision by the network to film the finale in a way that left multiple options open for the following season, with 3 different endings shot, and none of them selected because ABC canceled the show after the episode had already aired. Producer Bob Fraser revealed years later what the intended plan had been if the show was renewed. Governor Gatling would have won the election, and Benson would have gone on to become a United States Senator, continuing the climb that had been the backbone of the entire series. It was a logical next step and a satisfying destination for a character who had started in a domestic role and worked his way steadily toward national relevance. The audience never got there. The freeze frame is all that exists, and it has been there since 1986. Fact 2. Robert Guillaume starred in 2 different shows that both ended on cliffhangers. Robert Guillaume played Benson Dubois across 2 different television series, and both of them ended on unresolved cliffhangers. That is not a coincidence that happens to many actors. It is the kind of statistical improbability that attaches itself to a career and becomes part of the story, whether you want it there or not. The first was Soap, the groundbreaking ABC comedy that ran from 1977 to 1981. Guillaume played Benson on that show as a supporting character before the spin-off was created, and when Soap was canceled after 4 seasons, it left multiple major storylines hanging with no resolution. Viewers who had followed the show through its full run were left holding threads that would never be tied off. Among the weird facts about Benson, 1979, this parallel is the one that says the most about how television actually worked during that era. Networks canceled shows without necessarily thinking about what audiences had invested in them, and the result was frustration that outlasted the shows themselves by decades. Guillaume experienced this twice with the same character, which meant that Benson Dubois never officially reached an ending in either series. The character started on Soap as a sharp-tongued butler and ended on Benson watching an election result that was never announced. Somewhere between those 2 freeze frames was a 9-year run, 2 Emmy wins, a landmark in television history, and a character that Guillaume himself said he understood better than anyone else. The story ended twice, and neither ending was actually an ending. That is a strange legacy for a performance that deserved better closure, but it is the one that exists. Fact 1. The planned ending was finally revealed years later. For years after Benson ended in 1986, the question of who won the election between Benson Dubois and Governor Gatling sat unanswered. Fans who had watched the character climb from household staff to lieutenant governor to gubernatorial candidate were left with a freeze frame and nothing else. The show had been canceled after the cliffhanger aired, which meant the decision about which filmed ending to use was never made by anyone. The mystery held for over 2 decades. Then, in 2007, producer Bob Fraser sat down for an interview and finally told the story straight. He explained that if ABC had renewed the show for an 8th season, the plan was for Governor Gatling to win the election. Benson would have lost the race for governor. That part of the answer might have disappointed viewers who wanted to see the character reach the highest office in the state after everything he had worked for. Among the weird facts about Benson 1979, this final revelation is the one that reframes the whole journey. Because losing the governor's race was not the end of Benson's story in the version the writers had planned. He was going to be appointed to the United States Senate instead, continuing his ascent from the mansion to the national stage in Washington. The governorship was not the destination. It was the next step toward something larger. That trajectory made complete sense when you mapped it against everything the show had built across 7 seasons. Benson started in a domestic role and moved steadily upward through every level of state government he encountered. The Senate would have been the natural continuation of a story about a black man navigating American political power from the bottom to the top, one office at a time. The show ended before it could tell that part of the story. But the fact that the writers had already mapped it out suggests they knew exactly where Benson was always meant to go. Benson was never just a sitcom about a butler with a smart mouth. It was a show that quietly broke barriers, launched careers, and told the story of a man who refused to stay where he was put. Which of these facts surprised you most? Tell us in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss one.